Hello, viewers of The Pioneer. How are you doing? I hope you're healthy and well. As the Pioneer team, we continue to bring you the developments regarding Russia-Ukraine war. In a moment, we will bring you the latest developments on the front line with a map. The front line had a very active day, although there are reports that the Russian troops have increased their attempts to advance again. The Russian army has not made any significant gains. Let's start, if you are ready, for our map reports, where we will examine the latest situation on the front line, the Pioneer reports. Before moving on to our report, let's make a small reminder. As the Pioneer team, we continue to bring you developments regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so as not to miss our daily map reports and reports on the agenda. You can also support me and my hard-working team by using the super thanks button below the video. Thank you in advance for all your supports. As we reported in our previous reports, there is an activity on the Kherson front line. As far as we understand from the latest reports, there is a noticeable decrease in the advancing efforts of the Russian army. The reason for this decrease is the failed Russian advance, as we mentioned in our previous reports. As you may recall, the failure in question took place in the direction of Krynki. Therefore, the Russian offensive here has lost strength. This development provided a great advantage to the Ukrainian army because the Ukrainian army has gained a great advantage morally. It is exactly the time for the Ukrainian army to start a new advance attempt. Let's see if the Ukrainian army can take advantage here. Allow me to continue with the artillery activity in the region. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted Kherson and Antoniivka. You can see the Russian artillery activity today is quite limited. In contrast, artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces targeted units of the Russian armed forces stations in Olaperistan, Kokhani, Kardashinka, Esterla Zabrinka, and Nova Zhabrivka. Now let's look at the Zaporizhia front line. In our previous reports, we shared the salient details about the latest situation here. The morale of the Russian army is in a very low state as a result of the Russian offensive, which has been going on for months but has not yielded any results and gains. Ukrainian defense forces, on the other hand, still maintain their defensive potentials. The western side of the town of Robotin is important. As it is known, this is the point that the Russian armed forces have been trying to capture for the longest time. The success of the Russian army here will determine the future situation. If success is achieved, the Russian army may have a chance to gain an advance. However, we don't think that there is such a possibility at the moment. On the other hand, it has become critical for the Ukrainian armed forces in this region. As you can see on the map, the Robotin region is located at the very critical point on the Zaporizhia front line. For this reason, while preparing these reports, we consider the region as the Robotin sector. Here, the proximity of the town of Robotin to Tokmak, one to the main logistic centers of the Russian army, draws attention. We have seen it many times before, especially during the counteroffensive operations of the Ukrainian armed forces. Many supply points, logistic points, and the strategic warehouses of the Russian army were hit by the Ukrainian forces in this region. The efforts of the Ukrainian armed forces here are currently aimed at destabilizing the region. If stability in the region can be achieved on behalf of the Ukrainian army, there may be bad consequences for the Russian army. The Russian armed forces continue their local offensive in the direction of Verbov and Novoprokopivka. However, there is a similar situation here. The strong defensive fortifications of the Ukrainian army do not allow the Russian troops to advance here either. Let's continue with the artillery activity in the region. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted Orekhi, Verbotin, Pyatykhatki, Lobkov, and Kaminsky. On the other hand, artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces targeted Horozov, Luhov, Livny, and Holotsky. Where the Russian army is located, Ukrainian artillery units have chosen new targets for themselves. Now let me briefly mention the Vuhledar sector of the Zaporizhia front line. Here too, the situation is in the favor of the Ukrainian army. As the other two front lines, we see that the Russian troops cannot make any progress here. Therefore, the Ukrainian army still has a moral advantage. The traditional attacks of the Russian army under Stromyorsk and Yurkhain have again failed. The Ukrainian army is holding its positions. The borderline is largely stable. Now I continue with the Donetsk front line. This is the point of the front line that currently poses the great risk to the Ukrainian army. Yes, there is a risk, but this risk is still not too great because, as we mentioned in our previous reports, the defense of the Ukrainian army here has passed a very successful test so far. all efforts of the Russian army have come to the north. Moral superiority is also in the hands of the Ukrainian army here. However, there is a situation where the Russian army also has an advantage: firepower. We have touched upon these issues before, but I think this would be useful to remember that the Russian army is currently using most of its firepower on this front line. This is the biggest advantage that the Russian army currently has in this region. However, we can't say that the Russian army has utilized this advantage well so far. According to the latest report on the Donetsk front line, Russian forces continued to carry out attacks on the southern outskirts of the Novomikhailivka near Gorogorivka from the southeast and northeast towards Avdiivka and in Stepnoy. However, the attacks were inconclusive. The Ukrainian army continues to hold all its positions in this area. Let me also mention the artillery activity in the region. According to the latest reports, artillery units of the Russian armed forces targeted Avdiivka, Severny, Tonenki and Permovsky. In contrast, artillery units of the Ukrainian armed forces targeted Vodyadny, Pitsky and Opitny. Let's continue with looking at the latest situation on the Bakhmut front line. According to the latest reports, on the Bakhmut front line, the Russian army continued its offensive over a large area. The dominant hills of Klishchivka, which we mentioned earlier, were again the target of the Russian army today. But there is no result. The Ukrainian army continues to protect its positions. On the other hand, Russian forces continue their attempts to break through the Ukrainian defense around Horomov and Bogdanivka on the Bakhmut front line. However, there are no developments in this area either. Ukrainian artillery units stationed in the area are playing a critical role. They have shown a great success in repelling the Russian offensive. Let us also look at the Luhansk front line. According to the latest reports on the Luhansk front line, units of the Russian armed forces continued to launch attacks near Ternivka, Makiivka, Petropavlovka and Sinkiivka. Intense fighting is taking place in forested areas. This area is very active. However, it's possible to say that there is a noticeable silence of the Ukrainian forces. We think that we will talk about the Ukrainian offensive in the coming days. In borderline is largely stable. What do you think? How do you think the moral superiority of the Ukrainian armed forces will affect the front line? How do you interpret the failure of the Russian army's attempts to advance? Do you think the Russian army will adopt a new strategy? Let me know in the comments. I read and care about all your comments.